Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Minert, the City of Bowie Planning Director. I'm here to introduce this City Council virtual town hall meeting to you. This is a meeting tonight to talk about the Bowie Town Center amendment to the basic plan for the former Sears parcel. And we have a couple of brief presentations we're going to give this evening. We're also going to cover some public input that we've received by email to the city website. And we'll go through those items and direct the comments and questions to the council. The council may not be able to answer all the questions, but it certainly will be input for them as they make their decision on this case on September 3rd. This case is an amendment to the basic plan, and it is to add dwelling units above the current cap that's in the Bowie Town Center project, and also to allow mixed use within the retail center, which is in this core area of the town center. And the request is to add a total of 670 units to the current unbuilt number of 130, which adds up to 800 total new units, increasing the new maximum dwelling units for the project from 1,420 units up to 2,090 units. Just one thing I wanted to mention, we're recording this meeting this evening. We also are broadcasting it live on the city website, and there will be documents that we will post on the project website at cityofbowie.org so that you can follow up if there any desire to look at that information that's being presented tonight. So the format for this evening is we'll have a couple of brief presentations concerning the real estate market and housing and commercial development, as well as circulation and pedestrian facilities. We have a couple of presenters. For my own part, I'm the planning director for Bowie. I wanted to mention also that the county, Prince George's County, has a housing strategy, which is called Housing Opportunities for All. Also, the Council of Governments has produced a study that has encouraged the construction of 320,000 new residential units by the year 2030 within the Washington region. And the amount, as well as the accessibility to those units, 75% should be, at least 75% should be within designated activity centers, and affordability, that at least 75% of those new units should be considered affordable. In our staff recommendation, the city planning staff is recommending approval of this amendment to the basic plan, but we recommend a condition that at least 10% of the units be set aside as affordable units at 60 to 80% of the area median income, which would be, to qualify, you would have to have an income of 75,600 to 100,800 to participate in that program. So we're recommending 10% of the units. At this point, I would like to turn the meeting over to the moderator, who is Mayor Pro Tem Adrian Boafo, and he will lead us through the presentations, and I will come back later and go over the public input that we received to date. If anyone does have comments or questions that you want to ask during this meeting, please type those into the chat function, the question and answer function in Zoom. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Adrian Boafo.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thanks to all the citizens who are also participating on this. Before I get started, I'd be remiss if I did not introduce my colleagues who are with us today. We have Councilman Michael Lestev of District 1, Councilman Dufour Wolfley of District 2, Mayor Tim Adams, Councilwoman Roxy Ndebimadu, and Councilwoman Ingrid Harrison, who serves at large. Now, this is obviously a thing that we've been discussing for several months now. And this council is in a place of trying to figure out what we can do, for our businesses and trying to retain Class A businesses at the town center, but also discuss this residential component. As many of you guys know, the city never really has final say on some of these development projects. But where government can be influential, we want to be, and where we can have somewhat of a say of how we move forward is really what we want to discuss today. So today is really about hearing from you guys, hearing what feedback we should be giving developers, as we head into our meeting on September 8th and where we move forward. You'll also hear some presentations about transportation, but specifically happening right now and happening next. Let me introduce you guys to Boyd Campbell and our Economic Development Director here in the city of Bowie, John Henry King, who will specifically be talking about the residential component and how that ties into retail in a larger picture. So John and Boyd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This is John Henry King. I'm the Economic Development Director. Wanted to talk a little bit about retail in general and the world in which our Sears property specifically exists. So we've got a common ground. There are many owners that own commercial real estate within that big area we all refer to as Bowie Town Center. Washington Prime Group is the direct descendant to Simon Properties that built Bowie Town Center. They own the four main retail buildings. Macy's owns the Macy's building. Best Buy owns the Best Buy. Safeway bought and owns that entire chunk that contains Safeway, the Five Guys, First Watch, all of those shops. And shops at Bowie Town Center, the southern piece, is owned by a separate company entirely. So we're talking tonight just about the Sears building, which is owned by Seritage. Seritage is a real estate investment trust. It's been around since about 2015. It owns about 30 million square feet of buildings and 2,500 acres of land throughout the United States. So since 2015, they've owned the Sears in Bowie. And from the time they acquired it, they have been aggressively seeking tenants for the building as is. Sears finally closed in 2018, and Seritage continued to seek tenants. There were no big box tenants. That kind of leaves Seritage with two paths that they're looking at all of their properties, not just Bowie. One is, do we hold it for some time in the future? Or two, is there opportunity now and community support to change? They believe that there's community support in Bowie, and they are offering up a change that would redevelop the shopping center. The world they're in, big box retailers are disappearing. You read the same newspapers I read. A lot of the retailers we grew up with, a lot of the retailers we like and love are going away. Even such stalwarts that were thought to be immune to this system, like Nordstrom, are taking some big hits. Amazon. We've all shopped at Amazon. My box supply certainly shows that. Amazon has been coming in and using some big boxes, particularly old Sears. Now, they're not looking at our Sears, mainly because our Sears is a two-story building. The Sears buildings that Amazon's taking are one-story buildings. Think more like the Sears at Westfields, which are it's all on one level, versus the Bowie Sears, which was a two-story building. And Amazon has several warehouses in Upper Marlboro and Lanham that they have acquired. So reuse of our Sears is not something they'd look at. Grocers, other tenants, I love seeing your comments and suggestions. I'm in constant contact with the retail brokers that represent a lot of the named tenants, and we're working hard to get them here. But some of the really desirable ones, Trader Joe's and Cheesecake Factory for that matter, like to be in locations where there is a lot of residential population 24 hours a day. Now, that doesn't mean they're open all night. What that means is they want to know that there's a customer base there during the daytime, as well as a customer base there in the evenings when folks have gone away from the workplace. We're talking to them, but none of them have committed yet to looking at Bowie. And that brings us to the idea of mixed use. Mixed use is about combining other things with the retail. One of the first things we look at is office. Do we have places for our businesses to go and bring other employment here? Bowie has over 15% vacancy, and in some buildings, it's over 20% vacancy. So we are not a location where new office buildings will be built anytime soon. Industrial. We're not an industrial community. We don't have the zoning that supports it. Flex buildings are unlikely to be a good complement to the surrounding neighborhood for Bowie Town Center. Flex could maybe accommodate some very light manufacturing, some of this modern day maker space, but it's unlikely to be well located at Bowie Town Center. So that's out. That leaves the mixed component to be residential. There's an old adage in retail that says retail follows rooftops. The stores want to be close to their residents, and they would like to be places that provide opportunities for residents. Hence, you see a model such as proposed by Seritage that includes residential to go along with revived and revitalized retail. And that retail is going to include fewer shops and more destination and entertainment and family type uses. You're already seeing some of that in other spots within Bowie Town Center. So what's the residential world like? That's where I'm going to turn it over to Boyd Campbell. Boyd is an experienced real estate broker, over 40 years in residential real estate brokerage, past president of the County Association of Realtors, past president of the State Association of Realtors, a board member of the National Association of Realtors. He's been here a long time, done a lot of things, and he still has his office here in Bowie and is affiliated with a major national firm. Boyd, I'll let you talk about residential.
Mr. Campbell, I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate that. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me be part of the panel this evening to talk a bit about residential real estate. As John mentioned, I have a long history here in Bowie and in the real estate space, primarily residential. I will tell you, the demand for residential real estate is insatiable right now and has been for the last several years. And all indications are that it will continue. I mean, there's some reports out there that says the demand for residential real estate may drop off if interest rates go up or something happens as a result of COVID-19 and job opportunities dropping off. But we're not completely insulated from that in this area, but pretty much we're in a much better place because of a large federal presence here for federal jobs and contractors. BRAC, of course, as we know, and others come here because of so much has happened in the Washington metropolitan area. And I will tell you very explicitly, just the location of Bowie has made it very desirable as far as residential. So it really speaks to whether or not we are saturated with more residential than we can actually use or not. And unarguably, based on year over year appreciation rates, which are just north of, I should say, just shy of 8% for residential real estate on the sales end, and with regard to rentals, the market is just as robust. And the shelf life of rentals is less than 30 days based on our local MLS. With regard to mixed use, and that is something that I'm very familiar with. Going back probably 20 years, I worked with former Governor Glenn Denning. He had a group that had a smart growth task force that we worked on, and that word was thrown around, and still we're trying to get traction in a lot of areas with regard to mixed use. And I will tell you, all that I'm involved in across the country, that is where many cities and towns are gravitating to. And not because it's new and shiny and sexy, but because that's what the doctor ordered. Affordability limits a lot of folks from being able to buy that single family home in the cul-de-sac with the picket fence. And so many are relegated to smaller compact spaces, and millennials, Gen X, Gen Y are quite comfortable going into more compact vertical spaces where they have communal places for entertainment, for relaxation, and also work opportunities. So it's work, play, live, and I think it's here to stay. Some would ask, and I think part of the proposal with the Sears, just to make it relevant to today in this particular project, that they may be rental properties. And I will tell you that when we talk about retail, we talk about mixed use, there's no real distinction between the type of ownership with regard to those residential properties. So one could argue that there's really no disadvantage when you're talking about rentals versus, say, condos in a mixed use environment like that. It really comes down to the need and the population to feed that need. and I just see it continuing to grow. And not just with millennials, I will tell you, many seniors have migrated to that place as well as they start to wind down. My personal experiences have been that many folks who live in Bowie, been in Bowie, want to stay in Bowie, but they don't want all the upkeep with single family residential, a mixed use, something akin to a condo or an apartment, structurally the same thing, configuration, same thing. I think there's a great opportunity there, and I think the demand will be there for the foreseeable future. Going forward, I honestly think that that particular site, and I'm familiar with that site, is just does so much in the way of satisfying the mixed use. I think it goes a long ways as far as preserving other places where you could build something new and take advantage of virgin ground somewhere. But I think with the infrastructures there, with the retail there, with other amenities there, that's just a great location. And that's just my personal opinion. And certainly residential is the main component when you're talking about mixed use, and retailers and even employers rather are looking for rooftops. They're looking for individuals, and they want them in close proximity. So that kind of wraps up just a macro perspective about the residential, and I'll stick around to answer any additional questions you guys may have. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Boyd and John Henry King, for that. That's really important for folks to really know what environment we're kind of in now and where we see ourselves heading from a residential and retail standpoint. Next, I want to introduce Joshua Wooten, who's a member of our Green Team's multimodal and public space public space subgroup, not transportation subgroup. Obviously, that's going to be really important as we talk about this development. So Joshua, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Adrian. So I just want to introduce myself and kind of what my group, what we actually do. So my name is Joshua Wooten, and I chair the Bowie Multimodal Access and Public Spaces subgroup of the Bowie Green Team. And, I just want to share some of the core principles that our group advocates for in connectivity and placemaking projects in and around the city of Bowie. So our group was formed in 2017 to advocate for multimodalism and the creation of vibrant public spaces in and around the city of Bowie. Our vision is to create vibrant areas that are more pedestrian friendly, bicycle friendly, less car dependent, and provide shared community spaces and linkages. Some examples are parks, plazas, and trails. So given the location of the Sears property, we believe that the redevelopment presents a perfect opportunity to create a mixed-use development that incorporates these principles and provides connectivity to City Hall, surrounding city amenities and commercial venues and local trail networks. So in general, multimodalism strives to create and improve the mobility, access, and safety of an area for multiple transportation modes, including but not limited to public transportation, rail, bicycle, pedestrian, including those with disabilities and cars. It's designed to be affordable and efficient. So having a broader mix of transportation options is highly compatible with more vibrant neighborhoods and economically prosperous mixed-use developments. This property is particularly suited to multimodal options because it's surrounded by several trails, walkways, and pedestrian bridges that would provide connectivity to surrounding commercial and residential neighborhoods and several city facilities. Designing a development like this really shifts the focus away from cars and more towards people. So two social benefits of this shift are less traffic congestion and lower greenhouse gas emissions. So this is beneficial not only to the environment, but to those who live in and around the area of the development. Mixed-use developments are becoming more and more common in the DC metro area and the country in general, especially given that commercial-only developments are faltering due to pressure from online shopping. You kind of know this, just thinking of Amazon. And generally, America is kind of over-retailed. Online shopping is really shrinking the need for brick and mortar shops and commercial-only developments. And specialty retail, housing, dining, and entertainment and personal services are areas in which walkable mixed-use areas are really thriving, and malls and the internet typically can't compete. Another social benefit of mixed-use developments is the focus on shared community spaces, such as parks and plazas. Public spaces are a really important asset in many communities. Whereas a typical strip mall is more so designed for motorists to park, shop, and quickly leave, a vibrant public space creates a place where people want to come together and engage with the community. The Sears property would be an ideal site for creating attractive spaces that would ensure the vitality of not only that space, but also the surrounding commercial and city properties. The Project for Public Spaces, which is a nonprofit organization that is heavily involved in global placemaking projects, it highlights a number of factors that contribute to a successful public space. Some of these factors are, and there's more, but some of them are accessibility. So accessibility includes how welcoming the space is and whether people can access a space in the way in which they feel comfortable. The space should be open and accessible to all people, including those with disabilities, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, age, or socioeconomic level. Some examples that we can think of that should be considered are multiple bike racks, public restrooms, and adequate outdoor seating. Another factor is comfort. This is the ability for people to be themselves in the public realm. So one of the greatest joys that with going to a public space is that people can express themselves fully. One example of being comfortable in a public space is engaging with public art. For example, the Bean sculpture in Chicago's Millennium Park is a great example where people are comfortable to express themselves. Another thing that kind of enhances the comfort of an area are plants and attractive landscaping. They play an integral part in improving the comfort of the space and creating a green space where people can just kind of come and, if they're thinking or they just need to just release themselves of thinking, they can just go there and think. Another factor is sociability. Public spaces provide many opportunities to come together, engage with the community, and strengthen social ties throughout the community. Having social events in the public space, such as music concerts or hosting movies, are a great way to get people to engage with one another and form a sense of togetherness. So some of the things that we recommend incorporated in the space are dedicated outdoor entertainment that includes access to electrical hookups and provisions for sound and lighting. And another factor is uses and activities. So activities form the basic building blocks of great public spaces, and they are the reason why people visit in the first place and why they continue to return. So these are just some of the benefits, but even based on these benefits, it kind of could be argued that public spaces should be considered a basic service with the same priority as transportation, water, and sanitation services, which communities often primarily focus their resources on. So as I wrap up, I just kind of want to reiterate that, we think that the redevelopment of the Sears property presents a perfect opportunity to create a mixed-use development that incorporates multimodal and placemaking principles as I outlined. There's many benefits that can be realized through successful implementation of these principles. These benefits would impact not only those in and around the redeveloped property, but also the city of Bowie in general and those outside of Bowie. So as discussions with Seritage continue regarding the property, we just ask that the City Council residents of Bowie kind of push for implementation of these principles and a design and development of the property. And that wraps it up for me. So thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Joshua. And just like you said, right, we are here today not just to hear from our residents, but so that we can go back and deliberate with Seritage and with our staff about what the best options are in terms of moving forward. So that's really where we're going to be key on. I just want to say 2 points before I turn it over to Joe so we can start asking questions. This is a very new council. And one of the things that we have been successful in doing is actually voting down development projects. And this project presents a unique opportunity for us, right? A lot of folks talk about the Bowie Town Center and its decline. A lot of people talk about how we've lost businesses to Wall Chapel. And really the major difference we see is that residential component. So what we're here for today, and I know what this council wants to do as we head into September 8th, is to hear from our residents, right? Figure out what do we want to pitch this heritage, and ultimately to the county as the final thing that we want to see here in our own community. Is that less units? Is that more multimodal opportunities? What does that look like? And so with that, Joe, we can start taking questions. And for my colleagues, please feel free to chime in and answer whatever you feel you need to answer.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And again, good evening, council members. We do have a list of inputs that we received by email, and I'd like to run through and read those similar to how the city clerk does at your meetings. We also have the ability here to take questions through the Q&A function of Zoom, and council members do have, I believe, the ability to look at those questions as we're going on, and I'll leave it to you if you want to bring up those items. But I have a total of 15 emails that I want to read the questions and comments for your consideration, and let's go ahead and get started. These are organized into major categories, but sustainability is one of the categories that was repeated through a number of the submissions. School impacts, senior housing as a possible use there, and then other suggestions for other types of uses. So those seem to be the themes going through the inputs that we received. So the first few here are related to sustainability. We received a input from Mr. Arnold Key, and Arnold asks several questions. He notes that green building standards like LEED are providing opportunities for motivated companies and cities to provide sustainable residential and commercial spaces. He asks, number one, which design firms are you working with to create the plans for this development? And number two, do you have any reservations about adopting a green building standard? The next input that we received was from Aned Ruiz, and the input from Aned says, I am now a 9-year resident of the city of Bowie, and one of the things I have enjoyed the most about Bowie are the plentiful green spaces and scenic walking and hiking trails. Keeping the health of our planet and the green beauty of our city in mind, what are the green/natural space plans, water and parking lot amelioration plans, and sustainable building practices of the builders and developers interested in renovating the Sears building space? As the city of Bowie continues to grow and expand to new residents and appeal to new businesses, I believe one of the best methods for maintaining the appeal of this city is to raise the bar for developers and builders looking to expand into Bowie and extend offers to those developers who can provide sustainable building practice plans such as carbon neutral buildings, the incorporation of green rooftops/gray water management/solar or alternatively powered electricity, and the use of more sustainable locally sourced building supplies, for example. In the effort to provide a clean and environmentally sound community for our neighbors and children, I think developers looking to expand into Bowie should be able to provide services and buildings that do more to enhance the environment of their residents by providing green space, community garden spaces, for example, and take care to not detract from our environment by depleting local resources and adding unnecessary pollution without plans for sustainable amelioration. Let's make Bowie a shining example of cutting-edge sustainable architectural design practices as we move forward into the 21st century. Thank you. Okay, the next input that we received was a statement from Maureen Fine. And let's see if I could bring that up here.
Well, Joe, while you do that, I will just comment on the two previous statements that were made. And just for everyone's awareness, I think that although some questions we cannot answer because we do not have the Seritage and the developers in front of us, we can definitely have our staff send that to us, and be sure to ask them that during our council hearing on September 8th. Someone made a point about our green building standards. Obviously, there are county codes and state codes that developers have to go through. We in our city of Bowie also have our own development guidelines. And looking at green building standards is something I'm pretty sure that this council will be interested in doing. So that was a really good point. And I think the second person said something about raising the bar for the developers and the type of standard architecture that we want to see here, right? And so that's something obviously I think that we can be looking to do as we reshape our development guidelines here in the city. So Joe, back to you.
Okay, I do have the input from Ms. Maureen Fine. She says my question regarding the Sears property is whether there are any possibilities for the property other than multi-use housing or commercial development. If so, what might they be? My comment is that a mixed-use development, hopefully fewer than 800 units, would be better than just more commercial development. I was thinking that a community which models all of the recommendations in the Climate Action Plan, solar powered, energy efficient, and bird friendly, surrounded by green infrastructure with EV charging station capabilities, could be a great opportunity to showcase a sustainable community in the metro area. So that's the input from Ms. Fine. The next submission was from Tamu Gibson, and the questions are as follows. Number one, what are your environmental sustainability plans for this proposed area which is covered in concrete? Do you have a tree planting initiative to increase the planting of trees and shrubs and flowers that is consistent or even greater than what the city of Bowie currently has in place? Number two, how do you plan to move the city forward with modernized / environmental sustainable architecture plans? Number three, have any of your business / building plans changed since the advent of COVID-19? If so, what are they? And number four, who are your target income groups for the ownership / rental of the proposed units and to patronize the proposed eateries? Thank you. So that's the input from Mr. Gibson. The next input that we received was from Andrea Jones. And Ms. Jones actually submitted two inputs, but the first one I'll go ahead and read. I live in the city of Bowie, and I wanted you to know that the community is against any increases or rezoning for residential units. Please consider my concerns. There are several residents are against it. This does not enhance the city of Bowie living that we have come to enjoy and love. We have multiple apartment units nearby that location that have low occupancy. We do not have a need for more apartments. Unless those apartments are at 80%, 90% occupancy, there isn't a need for the residents. Also, we cannot keep the storefront stores we have. No adequate marketing of this current commercial property have been shared to give us an indication that new storefronts will come. I would like you to hone in on several concerns. First, the developers indicated that $1,000 per unit would go toward the school system. How exactly does this happen? Is it forever? But more of the issue is the increased class size that will result. This is a problem on multiple levels. Decreased learning with increased class sizes, strains on the local schools, infrastructure, and decrease in property values because of the increased class size. Until we can get new elementary, middle, and high schools to help ensure the class size is reasonable, this should be a non-starter. The class sizes are already to capacity or over. This is a quality of life issue. Second, water, sewage, and infrastructure costs. We've already received an increase in this area which residents are unhappy with. Will current residents have to pay for the development and maintenance through increased property taxes? Probably yes. Third, property values are likely to stay stagnant, or decrease. We want it to increase. Increased unoccupied housing stock will decrease home values. Lastly, the infrastructure cost of services the city of Bowie needs will provide has a cost associated with it. In fact, the benefit of living in Bowie is the accessibility of services. The property tax paid by the developer will not support the services potential 2,000 new residents will need, negatively impacting current residents. Some residents and I have developed ideas for consideration in lieu of the 800-unit mixed-use property. And there's a list of 11 specific recommendations: large stores, senior independent living, Bowie State University housing, City of Bowie commercial community swim facility, ice hockey rink, trade school, maybe a partnership with Bowie State University, Prince George's Community College, or Prince George's Public Schools, a public school facility, film studio, Amish market or farmers market, Trader Joe's, manufacturing companies where skilled labor is required, possibly jobs for apprentices. She concludes by saying, we're not convinced that the developer has done his due diligence as to what the residents want or considered other ideas. And in Ms. Jones' second email, she suggested a couple of other options for the property, such as a miniature golf or top golf use and various types of restaurants. The next input that we received was from
Joe. I'm sorry,
Yes, sir.
I jump in here. Before you go on, John Henry King, could you speak to Mrs. Jones' comments about property values, how this property or development in general will kind of affect resident property values?
I'm going to ask Mr. Campbell to weigh in as well, but it will have no adverse effect. And based on past experience in almost every other community we've seen, it will cause an increase in property values over time. Boyd, are you still there?
I am still here, John, and I would agree with your comments. And I can't recall seeing any empirical data that would suggest that property values are going to be negatively impacted. From any major project of this size. I think we all would agree that supply and demand certainly shifts from time to time, but for many of the reasons I mentioned before, Bowie being a very desirable destination, I would venture to say it's not going to have a negative impact. And again, I apologize. I don't know factually what the vacancy rates are for the existing apartment complexes within the city limits, but I wouldn't think that they're doing so poorly. I mean, there's a lot of demand out there. Thank you.
That's true. The vacancy rate, the city does an annual study. We last did it in July. All of the vacancy rates are under 6%. The overall average is under 3% vacancy. Most apartment building operators plan for a 10% vacancy. That allows a couple of things. One, it gives them a little bit of a cushion. Two, it gives them some open units to do repairs and things like that as tenants transition. Bowie has very few vacant apartment units, which means Bowie is a very attractive place right now for those developers who want to build that kind of product, because they can build a product, they can build it at today's costs, and they can receive rents that are commensurate with the higher costs that they have. That has it. We're working with Mr. Minot, as he mentioned at the beginning, to try and get some of these documents posted on the city's website at the end of this meeting. I believe that will also include some housing statistics that Mr. Campbell has provided.
Sorry, jumping in, Mr. John Henry King. You mentioned the average, just so I understand correctly, the average vacancy rate of all of Bowie's apartment complexes currently is less than 3%.
That's what I said, but the actual number is 3.4%.
Okay.
That we've got one with a high of 5.7%, and the lowest one is 2.3%.
Okay.
That's of the 4 apartment complexes we have.
Gotcha. But the highest is only 5 point something percent.
Right.
And so that's half of the 10% vacancy that owners plan for.
Correct.
Okay.
And that, I mean, we see that in the excitement the investment market has. I spoke about developers because we can see those folks. They have to come to us and they come very publicly. What we don't see is when one of the apartment building owners sells, and several of our apartment buildings have sold multiple times over the past 10 years, and they sell because the rents go up and the occupancy stays low. It represents a good investment for those folks, which speaks to Bowie's value as a place. And I've got to point out that apartments provide an important component that we don't have a lot of in Bowie. And maybe even with the apartments we have, we don't have it, which is workforce housing. Where are the teachers, the police, the first responders? Where are they going to live? Everybody can't take a car home at night and go across the Bay Bridge or to wherever else they choose to live. We'd like to have those housing choices here. Multifamily is one of the ways we can get that.
And John Henry, sorry, just to clarify, when was this data collected on the vacancy rates, this most recent data?
July. We do it annually.
So this past July, like a month ago.
This past July, right, like about 45 days ago.
Okay, 45 days old data. That's pretty good. Thank you.
Right, and we've been doing this since 2011. It's fairly consistent. Bowie does not suffer large vacancies in our apartment buildings.
If I remember correctly, even recovering from the recession, our vacancy rate was still very low, if I recall, which, I mean, I'm going to chime in just to say this. Look, people who know me, have been following me in the 5 years I've been on the city council know that I'm not exactly the developer's favorite council member. I have voted no on every major development project we have had come before us in the 5 years I've been a decision maker. But, when I talk to real estate agents who operate in Bowie, the residential real estate agents are doing great. They have no complaints. We've gotten a lot of comments and questions about property values. Let's be very clear. The number one thing that impacts property values is the location of the land. That is the most important thing. And if you've been to DC anytime in the last 10 years, you'll know that you can stand just about any point in Washington, DC and see nothing but construction cranes as far as the eye can see. The demand for housing in the DC, Maryland, Virginia, Mid-Atlantic area is extraordinary. And we're seeing the growth in Northern Virginia. We're seeing it all across the Beltway region. We're seeing it outside the Beltway in Anne Arundel, Prince George's, Howard, and Montgomery. So the idea that the market won't bear, these residential units, any other concerns about the development aside, that's not a real concern. These units will sell. There is not a excess of housing in the greater DC area. There just isn't. And so there are a lot of side effects to development. There's school impact. Absolutely. There's traffic impact. And I'm very upfront that we don't have a lot of great answers on those because of the way that traffic is mitigated, because of the way highways are funded, because of the way schools are funded. Those are not easy. And we do not have any silver bullet solutions for those. Be very upfront about that. But when it comes to property values and crime and just general, will there be demand for these? The answer is yes. There's if you're a betting man, there's no real scenario in which these apartments are going to go empty or in which property values are going to decline. The main reason why I'm in favor of some redevelopment for this project that includes housing is because if we do nothing and the stores continue to fail, Macy's, I'm going to willing to bet, is 2 years away from failure. I'm going to guess. They've been closing stores left and right. And major name brand retailers this year have declared bankruptcy. Many of them have stores at the town center. It's already been going on, but the pandemic's just accelerated it. If we do nothing and the town center fails and is full of vacancies and becomes blighted, that will absolutely have a deleterious effect on property values. And it would be completely, it would be a dereliction of my responsibilities, right, as a resident of the city and a decision maker to allow that to happen. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place on this one. I don't love residential development on top of what we already have for the reasons of the congestion, the traffic impacts, and so on. But in this case, the known outcome of doing nothing is bad. There are trade-offs to the redevelopment with housing, but the long-term outcome there is still better than simply letting the town center decline and fail. And I just wanted to throw that out there. And I think there was a number of other comments we got that we're going to get to throughout this meeting.
Yeah, Mike, I want to chime in because you and John Henry King both mentioned something that's pretty important. I mean, you just spoke about this current pandemic we're in and how we get out of this right on the other side. And obviously there still is a demand for housing even within this market. But the interesting stat I heard a couple weeks ago that I want to share with folks is that 40% of minority businesses will not be able to sustain themselves after this pandemic, obviously, given not the best response on the federal level, and on other levels of government as well. Some of these businesses aren't going to be able to sustain. And as a lot of you guys know, we do have a lot of minority businesses in the town center, not just some big box retail. So we have to really figure out ways where after this pandemic, also strategically from a policy standpoint, how do we ensure that businesses want to come to Bowie? And how do we ensure that they want to stay in Bowie if they're already here and that they're not eyeing up the street in Wall Chapel and Anne Arundel? I just saw a comment from K-Star in the question section about workforce housing, and John Henry King just spoke about this. If you look at our city's inventory for housing, one of the things that we're in demand for is senior housing and workforce housing, people who are millennials like myself, right? People who live and work in the area, but can't afford DC, can't afford some of these other places in Prince George's County. And us as a city have to really have a larger conversation about how strategically we ensure that workforce housing is included in programs. Now, we're not talking about Section 8 housing when we say workforce housing. We are really talking about your teachers, your principals, your firefighters, folks who do serve our community in a holistic way, but just can't afford because they're getting priced out in other places. Folks like some of my friends who live in the city of Bowie, who can't leave, who don't want to leave the city of Bowie, but can't afford to really go anywhere else. And so we have to look at that. I know it's something that we did at Melford. It's something that whether through this basic amendment or throughout the process, again, this is a holistic development process and we'll be having conversations with Seritage, but at some point we, in my opinion, should be having a conversation about workforce housing and really looking at that guidelines that we've adopted in COG and the housing equality for all on the county level. So Joe, back to you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And just to remind everyone, this meeting is being recorded, and what we do is we have to upload the recording to the city YouTube site, and then we'll place the link from that YouTube site onto the project website. So you just go under the Sears redevelopment page on the city website, and we'll have that link probably up within the next 24 hours. The next contribution here to the meeting is from Matthew Gallagher. He states, I would like to present the following questions for the City Council to address regarding the Sears property at the Bowie Town Center. Will the increase in revenue from the 800 residences have a positive impact on our current property taxes? How will the increase in residences impact the water and sewer system, which is already old and in need of repair? Will the increase in the renovation to the water and sewer system to meet the needs of the 800 residences increase the taxes already levied against Bowie residents dealing with the rust-filled water? Will the building of the water and sewer system for the 800 residents delay the repair and replacement of current system already determined to be in need of repair? Will the increase of 800 residences overwhelm the Bowie police, who will need to provide additional patrols for such a large number of people? With the poor condition of PG County public school system, the third worst in the state, how will the influx of students impact the schools these children will attend? Will portions of the 800 residences be reserved for senior citizens, low income, etc.? If yes, what is the percentage breakdown? How will the increase of the 800 residences impact the drain on the internet, telephone towers, and connectivity? Will the communication companies have to install more towers or cables, thus passing the cost to current Bowie customers? How will the increase of 800 residences impact the drain on electricity and gas? Will the utility companies have to install more cables or pipes, thus passing the cost to the current Bowie customers? And that concludes the input from Mr. Gallagher.
Joe, I would like to make a couple points on that and also have you clarify, because I think some of his comments are also being asked in the Q&A section. So I think that'll be really helpful to go through. First, on the water side, as many of you guys know, there are two types of water systems that you could be on here in Bowie, the WSSC or actually the city water line. The rusting that we're actually seeing happening, and it's happening in my district, as well as my colleague Dufour Wolfley, it's a real problem that we're trying to address and trying to figure out where we can get that money to kind of stop that rusting that's happening. But this new project wouldn't be on that water line, right? It'd be on a brand new one, and so that shouldn't be a problem that folks worry about. Joe, I'd like you to speak to, because I see this also in the comment, traffic in schools. Has there been a traffic assessment study in the staff report about that? And has there been a conversation about schools as well and the overcrowding?
There is a traffic study that was done to meet the standards that are applicable to this phase of the review. Again, we're not reviewing a site plan right now. We're not reviewing a subdivision. Subdivision stage is usually where the adequate public facilities test is done. But what we're reviewing is an amendment to the basic plan. So really the traffic test is somewhat broad, and it's really looking at whether the master planned road network is sufficient to handle the amended area, the additional units that are being proposed here. And when I say the master plan road network, I mean the ultimate classification of the streets on the master plan. So that if you have a road that's supposed to be 6 lanes and it's only currently 2 lanes, you count it as a 6-lane road. At this stage in the process, that's how the traffic impact analyses are done. What they did find in their study was, I think, some turning movement issues at Excalibur Road and Mitchellville Road. And that's something that is sort of a red flag to be looked at as they get into the next phase of review, which would be the preliminary plan of subdivision. So there could actually be conditions placed on that later approval that might require certain improvements or certain things to be done in order to address any deficiencies that are identified. So that's the traffic situation. With respect to the schools, again, that's handled as part of the preliminary plan of subdivision review. The county does a review, and really it's just for accounting purposes only. They look at the number of new students generated by the project, and they look at the school capacity within the system of schools that serve the Bowie area. They call that the cluster area. And so as long as the cluster area is not exceeded, the capacity is not exceeded by enrollments annually, the county does not consider there to be an inadequacy. And they do make adjustments every year as the county council approves the public school system budget. They'll make adjustments every year to the schools within that cluster if they foresee any coming deficiencies in terms of capacity. So that is all focused on at the time of preliminary plan of subdivision, which would be the next step if this amendment to the basic plan is approved by the county council.
Say, Joe, this is Dufour. If you would be so kind, can you step through some numbers again for us? You started off the meeting with a quick overview on what the request was. Can you start with how many units are currently authorized for the parcel that exists there presently, and how many are being additional are being requested, and what the total quantity would yield, or what that total would yield?
Well, currently the lot that we're talking about, which has the Sears, vacant Sears building and the BJ's restaurant, those are all part of what's called Lot 6. There is no residential use permitted on Lot 6 currently. But within the overall town center, which is a much larger project than just the retail area, there was a limit of 1,420 dwelling units, of which a substantial number have been built, throughout the community there. And there's a leftover number of 130 units under that approval. So there are 130 units that are unbuilt, and the applicant is requesting, in this case, additional 670 units to add to the 130, which they would like to claim for their lot 6, resulting in a total of 800 units in their proposal. And that would ultimately increase the maximum number there for the entire town center project from the 1,420 that I mentioned to a new total of 2,090 units.
So as a follow-up to that, with a additional 800 units, typically, what would we expect to see in terms of the typical? I know they don't have a plan of subdivision, they don't have details yet, but typically what would we expect to see in terms of additional students coming out of something like that? I would assume that something like a apartment or townhouse or something along those lines is going to generate fewer students. Are there any numbers, some rule of thumb as to what we could expect the impact would be for our school system?
We haven't done the calculations. I'm not sure that the county has done it yet because it's not really at the stage where they would do that. But there is the county's pupil yield study, which was issued a couple years ago, and I think we provided that to the council. And in that study, it gives you the pupil generation rates by the type of dwelling units. So it is possible to make a reasonable guess as to the number of students that would come out of a particular type of housing.
Okay, is that something you can dredge up for us and be able to speak to at our meeting on this subject?
Sure.
Excellent, thank you. And if that's the case, I presume that if we go in with requests, or if down the road we establish some limits or some commitments on senior housing, whether it's active senior or a certain percentage, I would imagine that you'd be able to divine some kind of pupil rate out of that. Presumably it's 0, given that majority of the active senior would not be having large family contingents with them.
You're correct.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, I know that George Stefanos from Public Works is not with us this evening, but to the extent that you're able, can you talk a little bit? We've gotten a lot of questions about impacts to water and sewer. Adrian touched on that. One of the things that residents are essentially asking is the cost of water and sewer rates going to increase? And can you just touch on that a little bit?
Well, this area is actually in the WSSC water and sewer area. It's not within the city of Bowie water and sewer system. So a lot of those issues that you hear about, the rusting in the lines and the aging system that needs repaired, is part of the city of Bowie water and sewer system. So this is on the WSSC water system, and the area around the town center, all of those lines were put in when the town center was developed initially, so they're not nearly as old as the water and sewer in the Levitt sections. Any upgrades that would be necessary to serve this property would have to be funded by the developer as part of their permitting process, so that if the lines have to be increased for capacity, they'll have to make those changes wherever it's necessary to do that.
Thank you for that. Okay, so just to be clear, this is in the WSSC zone. It's not going to directly impact city water and sewer in any way because it's a completely different system.
That's correct.
And the developer is required to pay to put in the new pipes and so on. So it's not even going to directly impact WSSC existing users. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And WSSC, to be clear for those watching, covers most of Prince George's and Montgomery counties. So, with, a couple million customers, you're not looking at a significant direct impact to you for a system that large when more houses are being built. That impact is spread out over quite a lot of users.
Okay, I'd like to go to the next input that we have. This is from Barbara Gardiner. Dear sirs and madams, I don't think I'll be able to attend the meeting. My concerns and questions are below. So far, I'm not impressed with this plan. Why do this? 800 units to be developed. Are these apartments or condominiums? Who is the target audience? Number one, what is the plan for parking at estimate of 2 or more cars per unit? Number two, what is the impact going to be on the current traffic infrastructure, Route 197, Route 301, and back streets? Number three, what is the impact going to be on the surrounding schools? Number four, what are the security plans? Mixing housing units with the current Bowie Town Center shopping structure. Number five, who is going to pay for the roads, schools, and other infrastructure changes needed to accommodate such a plan? Number six, have you determined a threshold for the development in the area while maintaining the current ambiance? When is enough enough? Number seven, how is this housing structure of 800 more units going to impact the current community atmosphere and environment? Number eight, what is the impact to the city government? More personnel, budget, equipment, etc., and cost. Number nine, look holistically at all the development considered in the area. Don't just look at one project at a time. Number 10, do a thorough risk, SWOT, and benefit analysis before making a decision. Please don't just listen to the developers. They want the business, so they will always paint a rosy picture, and we're stuck. Remember, you all ran on a platform of less development. Please don't let us down. And that concludes the comments from Ms. Gardner. The next input is from Victoria Herman. Good afternoon. I am not in favor of the idea of building 800 residential units, including multifamily and townhouses at this site. However, as it is well known that our county council are never adverse to the idea of more development in Bowie, no matter if the location or the amount of development is the desire of the residents of Bowie. Therefore, I would suggest rather than building 800 multifamily units, the Seritage Company look at what is going on in Watchapel, where a large number of former Bowie stores have relocated, and develop/build a lower number of townhouses for active seniors, again, like the new development next to Watchapel. Thank you for your consideration, Victoria Herman.
Joe?
Yes, sir.
Boyd Campbell, can I weigh in for just a couple of points I wanted to make with some of the comments?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a common theme that I'm listening with some of the comments, and I'll be honest with you. One of the things that I work real hard at, and that is to understand and build a profile for prospective buyers and renters, for that matter, because I service both sections of the consumer. And I will tell you, the consumer today who can't afford to buy is certainly renting. And many times that's the precursor to ownership. And so I think it bears mentioning that many of the individuals who may be renting are the future homeowners of Bowie, which kind of bolsters that demand for housing in the future, which is also going to prop up property values. So one could argue that certainly overdevelopment and the consequences with overdevelopment could be a negative thing. I can assure you, based on what I have seen and what I literally experienced, having been in this business 40 years and know Bowie intimately, I would say with a certain amount of confidence that is probably going to be the outcome. And so I think that bears mentioning. Also, we've heard the Watchapel mentioned a couple of times. And again, I know that area intimately. And I will tell you what is conspicuously absent is that Watchapel has a significant number of townhouses and condos in close proximity to those centers there. I mean, if you walk 1 mile in any direction from Watchapel and that new development, even the older parts of Watchapel, you will see tons and tons and tons of townhouses and condos. I mean, stacked on top of one another. And as John Henry King has said, and it's a fact, retailers and other businesses and even employers look for rooftops, and they look for a great young, smart population to serve the need as employers and certainly customers for retail. And so I think that when you start looking at the negative impacts, and I think Mr. Esty mentioned it as well, you got to kind of take the good with the bad. And I don't want to give you a commentary. I'm giving you what I know to be factually in a profile of a prospective tenant, and many would argue that that's exactly what is needed, is a good, stable population of people who rent, and many choose to rent because they can't afford to buy, and others because a lot of young people today says, I'm going to delay buying a house. I'm a bit more transient now. I want to be in an apartment. I don't want those kinds of commitments. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, I'll move next to we're about halfway through this written testimony. The next one is from Ms. Carla Jenkins. Hello, what is the plan with upgrading schools that will be needed to educate more of the residents from early childhood to high school and to aftercare? Can we afford to have overcrowded schools, which will mean our children will not receive the necessary attention they need when it comes to being a scholar, and added stress to teachers? The recreation centers, parks and recreation, what are kids going to do for extracurricular activities with having more added strain to the local schools? Are there improvements in this area? So that's the input from Ms. Jenkins. The next contribution is from, from Moni Pinder. Moni Pinder writes, who is behind this constant building of housing projects? Bowie citizens have complained over and over again about the constant building of housing with no comparable building of high schools and roads. Can any elected official listen to the citizens and do something besides build retail and residential projects? What about a nice 7 days a week open air market where you can buy fresh vegetables, fruits, cheeses, fresh meats, and dairy products, among other things? Also, there could be nice little eateries, coffee shops, wine tastings, etc. Why do we have to go to DC or Virginia to enjoy these things? It seems that Bowie politicians have not yet learned how to keep our dollars at home. And that's the input from Moni Pinder. The next contribution is from Leroy Ferguson. And Mr. Ferguson writes, I was able to read your density study as it relates to development of the Sears property. Study only accounted for the Essington neighborhood, Heather Ridge, but didn't account the density in the following properties, all located less than a mile from the Sears building. Properties: Covington, Palisades, the property behind City Hall, and Bowen. Without including those properties in your density study, the impact of 800 additional units will not provide an accurate picture of the impact of those additional units. The next.
Joe, I'm so sorry. Do you mind if
Yes.
we pause for a minute and address a couple of the themes that have been recurring? Mr. John Henry King, if you're still on, one of the questions we're seeing a lot is kind of related to Wall Chapel, and that, the proportion of housing to shopping at the town center, some people feel is basically just way out of whack. Do you happen to know off the top of your head? I mean, I remember not that long ago when Wall Chapel was all trees. The amount of total housing in the immediate vicinity of Wall Chapel is pretty significant right now, is it not?
It is, and there's more being built. And that's one of the attractive features of the retail location up there to those retailers that have moved from Bowie to that location. That said, I don't have specific numbers to show the density. I do know that there is a lot of townhouse constructed much closer to the retail in Waugh Chapel than we have here in Bowie. I don't know, is that a good thing? I don't know. It's one of the things that makes those locations attractive to the retailers because there are a larger number of potential customers within a very easy walk.
Right. Thank you for that. Joe, a lot of the questions we've gotten are related to process. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but do you mind giving just kind of a quick summary of the environmental review process and just overall the things that the applicant have to go through in order to ultimately pull permits? Can you just give residents just kind of so they understand the things that have to be looked at by law for this to happen?
Okay, well, first of all, it's a redevelopment of an existing property. So the original development had to go through a more detailed process because it was a greenfields development. Trees were cut down, you had to alter the land. In this case, since it's a redevelopment, there's in a sense a less onerous environmental test because the property is mostly developed. It's practically all paved. There are some requirements as you go through the different stages of this review process when you get into the subdivision stage and when you get into this what's called the specific design plan, which is your actual plan for what you're going to build. There are some design standards that are attached to the Bowie Town Center project that, things like Mr. Wooten talked about earlier, separating the pedestrian systems from the parking lots and providing green buffers and things like that. So in a sense, you will have an opportunity when you actually see the specific property and how it's going to be developed with a specific use, a specific building. You can really use that opportunity of site plan review to try to maximize these principles that have been discussed. And the council has a lot of things in the development review guidelines that would come into play at that stage of the process. And we would want to get, for example, a lot of trees, a lot of mature trees, even within, as an example, within the town center in the retail area, the Main Street area, we were able to get them to plant larger trees than required by the county landscape manual because it was in the center of town. And so all of those things will be looked at and responded to sort of in real time in relation to the specific building that's proposed or the specific parking facility that's proposed. And that will all be subject to public hearings as the site plan goes through that review.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, because and ultimately here, we're not, if we were taking a forest and ripping it down and building a new development, I think all of us on this council would have a lot of problems with that. And we have voted down just in the last 6 months multiple projects that propose to do just that. And in fact, we actually recently got good news about the Jesuit property, that the Jesuit property deal with Elm Street developers has fallen through. So that is not going to be developed the way that was proposed in previous years. So we've had some wins in the last few months, but we're talking about a place that's already paved. There's not going to be a lot of new stormwater, issues with this. It's already, a developed area. As far as the environmental impacts, we're mostly just looking at what are the buildings going to be. And the total environmental impact of that is fairly minimal compared to the environmental impact of taking a place that's already a field or forest and turning it into a development, which is, I think, something that pretty much everyone on this group, on the current council, is pretty adamantly opposed to. So I appreciate your chiming in about that.
If I could just add, Mr. Estev, that the comments we heard earlier tonight about sustainability and green building, those are the types of things that we really would want to demand as part of the site plan review of whatever kind of building that gets built there. The other thing I'd want to say is that in relation to this property specifically, when the original retail developer did the town center, they actually approved or were approved to do off-site tree mitigation. They were required to go to the Beltwoods property and they entered into a partnership with the Western Shore Conservancy to over on that property to actually afforest a huge area of farmland. And so in a sense, the property's been I don't know what the right word is, preloaded for solving some of the environmental impacts through making that agreement to plant the additional forest at the Belt Woods, which really maximizes the value of it.
Understood. The only other thing I had immediately, Joe, a lot of the questions we're getting are related to the impact on city services. And just to be clear, the main services that the city provides, the expensive ones anyway, are police and public works. The less expensive but still important ones are related to community recreation, the various fields and centers that we run. We don't control all the fields and recreation programs in the city. But we've got the senior center, the gym, the ice rink, and several ballparks. Can you just comment generally on what you see as being the main impacts to the city as far as city services, in particular police and public works, Joe?
Well, I can't give you an actual quantified number. We haven't done that type of analysis at this stage, but I lost my train of thoughts. Here's what I was going to say, Mr. Esteve, is that in similar to what we did with the South Lake annexation, the staff would take a look at each department would take a look at the demand, the additional population demand, and look at whether additional city facilities, do we need more trash trucks? Do we need more police officers? Those types of things. And we would do that through the budget process. And so once it's known that this project has been given the green light, and we would start to plan for the impact of those 800 units, we would have each department through the annual budget process assess those things and recommend, if necessary, adjustments and services to provide an adequate level of service.
And just to be clear, even if, and again, just to clarify, the council hasn't agreed to 800 units at this point. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say that we do agree on negotiating down that number from 800. We don't know where we're going to get it, but we're not probably, if I had to guess, we're not going to approve 800 units. It'll be somewhat lower than that. But the total impact, you're talking about, a less than 3% increase in the city's housing stock. Our police department currently has fewer than 70 officers. You're talking about one additional officer, maybe, for the police department. And because this is fairly dense housing in an area that already has a lot of dense housing, you're not talking about having to hire a lot of additional police who are going to have to patrol a large area. The reason why policing in Bowie is so challenging, as is the case with all suburbs with police departments, is that our police have to get into cars and drive their beats. They can't just walk around. When you have the advantage of having a whole lot of people in a smaller area, you don't need as many officers in vehicles driving around. And so it doesn't end up having, a major impact on police. And I could be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, the project that Seritage is proposing here would probably not have city public works doing trash and recycling pickup. They would probably have to individually contract privately for trash and recycling pickup, as do most of the apartment complex in the city. Am I right about that, Joe?
That's true with respect to the multifamily. That's typically a commercial type development anyway, and it's handled all privately. But this proposal does have some of the 800 units potentially being townhouse units, in which case the city would be involved in the trash pickup. Okay.
So townhomes, we would be picking up trash and recycling. The apartment units, we would not.
Right. And if there were condos built, it would be a similar thing to the townhouses.
Okay, gotcha. And the other only point on that is, if I'm not mistaken, the general number, the break-even point for a typical home's property taxes bringing in more money to the city than costing in services, I want to say is around the $350,000 mark. And when you're talking about higher density housing, the advantage there is that, you know, the total amount of property taxes being paid almost consistently well exceed the ultimate cost of city services, because we don't have to drive as far to pick up the trash. You know, we don't have to have a whole bunch of cops and cars driving around to do policing, because it's all more condensed. And so for residents who've been asking about the fiscal impact of the city, you know, one of the good things about the higher density model is that for the most part, the impacts to the city fiscally tend to be positive and not negative. The impacts to the city of a blighted shopping mall and the challenges that invites with a loss of revenue and, you know, potential issues of crime and vagrancy and so on, those have real costs. But these types of projects don't tend to end up losing us money in the long term, just talking about the impact of the city's property taxes.
Yes, in fact, that's very true. If you look at the city's financial report, the annual financial report, the apartment complexes are some of our largest taxpayers, largest revenue generators for the city, on par with some of the commercial shopping centers.
So we would not likely be looking at losing, you know, taxpayer dollars on a project like this, that the revenue it would generate would exceed the cost of services in just about every conceivable scenario.
That's more than likely, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a few more to read, and then the council can decide what to do with the Q&A comments that you're seeing there. The next contribution is from Sherry Hoffman, and she writes, "What happens to BJ's restaurant in the redevelopment? Bowie has a lot of new housing coming, but much of it doesn't focus on seniors. Why can't Sears property be redeveloped into an active senior area? Why townhouses? 800 units seems too many, especially when townhouse is included. Even 400 seems too many. What will be done to limit the environmental footprint of the redevelopment? Will the developer commit to using permeable asphalt? When or what will be done to make residents not use their cars to go shopping in the mall? I think senior living needs to have priority in the city and county. How would local schools be impacted by this development? People sometimes drive like maniacs and ignore traffic signs when dropping off their kids to Northview Elementary School. How will the developer make it so kids walk to elementary school? Wouldn't the roads be impacted less if Sears became low-density senior living? As long as there was a grocery store and other amenities, this could be a great arrangement for seniors." Okay, the next input we received was from Millie Hall. And Millie Hall says, "Good evening, owners of the Sears property. I understand as owners your interest in wanting to make a profit with your property. However, placing 600 to 800 townhomes in that space does not seem to be viable, especially when our schools within the area are already overcrowded. The infrastructure simply cannot handle it. Could you please consider upscale retail? For example, Von Maur has 36 locations in 15 states as an anchor to shopping malls as well as lifestyle centers. This would be unique as there are currently none within the region. With neighboring areas losing stores such as Nordstrom and Lord & Taylor in Annapolis, JCPenney and Woodmore Town Center, as well as New York and Company right within Bowie Town Center, there is a big void to be filled for retail. If we were to offer unique retailers that are new to the area, such as Von Maur, Belk, etc., this would draw a host of visitors potentially instead of losing them to other cities nearby. Perhaps the space could be filled with a wholesaler, such as a Sam's Club or a fulfillment center. If you must have residential plans in this commercial location, please consider making it an active community for seniors 55 and up. Reason being less traffic, no additional children adding to the already overcrowded schools, and limited noise in general. Thank you for the time, Millie Hall." I just have two more to read. The Next contribution is very short. This is from Belinda Cabbage Stock. I vehemently oppose any further housing/apartment complex. We need more schools built for our children, more high-end stores and restaurants. And the last written contribution here is from Derwin Conwell. And Mr. Conwell writes, I would like to see the Sears property use as fitness center for seniors. The fitness center could have the state of arts equipment with indoor pool and saunas and locker room. This would provide us seniors with a safe environment to get and stay in shape. We do not need any more housing units. Regards, Derwin Conwell. And so, Mayor Pro Tem, that concludes the written testimony that we received before 5 p.m. tonight, or actually right up to 7 o'clock tonight. And as I said, you have the whole list of Q&A questions that have come in, and it's really up to the council as to what you want to do at this point in the meeting.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it. I want to mention one thing. Obviously, we've been talking with the developer over the last couple of months to figure out what we're going to do for our citizens here. I do want to note that in a meeting on Monday, they did let us know that they will be meeting with Dr. Goldstein and the Prince George's County school systems. And so we will follow up with them to see what that discussion leads to. The two things I see in the chat, and again, my colleagues can jump in here whenever they feel the need to. But the two things I see in the chat that I want to kind of talk to is the quality of shopping and what happens to BJ. I think that was a thing you just mentioned, Joe. BJ's will stay there, right? Obviously, BJ's probably is excited about having residential components and folks who can just literally walk right across the street to them. But this will help the quality of shopping we have, right? As you've heard in the beginning, there are multiple ways that we can really reshape this town center, especially coming out of this pandemic. That is one of the ways we can ensure that Bowie has Class A businesses here instead of what we've been seeing in the town center. And to what my colleague, Councilman Esteve, just said about the 800 units, again, I don't think any of us are married to that idea, and I don't think he was speaking out of turn with that, right? I think that is a number that we're all uncomfortable with, and we're going to continue to work to try to find a number that works for our citizens. Again, strategically, what we want to happen is our demands that we make as a city council as we move forward into September 8th, ensure that the county holds that to the developer so that, you know, everything that we've been fighting for and trying to get doesn't go to the wayside. So I'll let my colleagues, if there's anything else in the chat that I haven't seen. I think there's one from Ken, if someone wants to take that, specifically about town center being composed of several different owners. There's a risk that this could become a hodgepodge of development. Will the city facilitate cooperation to integrate redevelopment? For example, creating a safe way to walk into Safeway. Joe, do you want to take that?
Well, yes, that is a practical issue. The fact that it's not all controlled by a single developer like it was when the retail area was first developed. I think it really does help to work through the master plan, which is now being updated by the county. And the county, I think, makes a real effort to reach out to property owners and, you know, try to get their input on the future and to try to make sure that the zoning is adequate to provide for those that direction that property owners want to go in. I think it's really one of those things where we just have to try to work cooperatively. I know our economic development director has a very good relationship with all of the business owners, and we try as we can to, as they come in with their plans, to try to make these types of concerns known to them. And it really a lot of times will depend on where the developer is in the lifespan of their center. You know, new owners will come in and they want to spend money right away and they're willing to do a lot of things. Other owners may be at the end of their particular life cycle on a project, and they're just not able financially to put a lot of money into the project. So those opportunities come and go, and I think we just have to be attentive to that, the needs that we might have, such as better pedestrian circulation, and bring those suggestions up as we are able to do it strategically.
Mr. Broadfoot, I suggest that John Henry weigh in on that question as well, briefly related to the multiple owners at the town center and to the extent that they're potentially collaborating as far as thinking long-term on this.
Yep, absolutely.
Mr. John Henry King, do we have any insights as to the extent to which Seritage and Washington Prime are communicating with one another as we move forward with this project, the two different owners at Town Center?
We do know that they're talking. When the master developer, Simon, created the property, part of the development has a set of documents much as we might have as homeowners. There's an association, there are documents that govern what they have to do to cooperate, even though they are individual owners. So there is some control there, and the basic requirement is that they talk to each other and kind of get consensus and concurrence in any big changes. The second thing is the fact that the plans that were approved for it require a lot of public review, just as we're seeing now, and that's handled through the planning process. And the final thing is retailers tend to be much more cooperative than office or industrial developers, simply because they have to survive together. They're competing they're trying to position their properties to be competitive for tenants and not to cannibalize each other. So there's a lot of incentive for them as business people to work together on ideas that come forward. And then the public process steps in and ensures anything that's missed gets discussed and reviewed through a public process. So I hope that answers your question.
No, I think it does. I also recall at our last meeting when we decided to defer this until September 8 to hear more from residents and talk more with the other stakeholders. If I recall, Washington Prime actually sent a letter of support for this and basically argued that this would be a kind of, raising all sales scenario. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, you're correct.
They did come out and speak in favor of the project at the Bowie Advisory Planning Board hearing.
Okay, so the two main owners at Town Center are working together and are on the same page about this moving forward.
Yes, that appears to be the case.
Okay, thank you.
Do any of my colleagues have any other questions, comments, concerns?
Yes, if I may, a couple of things. First, I want to follow up on a discussion we had earlier with regard to the circumstances up at Watt Chapel. Joe, can you and your good offices do a little research for us again for the next meeting to see if you can find out what the retail square footage is up in that area and the corresponding amount of housing that's there and the general makeup of it? I'm sure there must be something that our colleagues up in the county next door could share with us in terms of information on that.
Certainly, I can do that. I know very little about the project, but I'd like to find out.
Yeah. And in particular, I have some interest in the nature of the housing stock that they have there. I know that they have a pretty good mix. I know there's some townhouses and there's some active senior, and I think there are apartments as well. So whatever you could glean from that would be very, very beneficial for us. So I think that would be a good start. The next thing I want to raise is something that I've seen in some of the questions here, which is what happens next, and something that it's of concern, and we alluded to it earlier, which is currently we're looking at the Sears property. They've come to us with a request for additional units to bring it up to 800. That means there'll be 0 left available. Currently, I think we had said there was 130 units unbuilt in that space. So that brings it, up to a complete build out. But I think we heard earlier that we can expect, or it's reasonable to expect, that there will be continuing progress or devolution or evolution, however you want to think of it, with the retail space there, whether it's Macy's or someplace else, where we could expect that there's going to be a request somewhere down the road for additional mixed use or residential usage in that area. Can you speak to me and to the community as a whole as to what that process looks like?
Well, there are a number of things that come into play. The county general plan that was approved in 2014 approved certain activity centers in the county where there was supposed to be more intense development and redevelopment, and the Bowie Center is one of those centers. And so there is an allowance in the general plan from a policy standpoint to have much higher density within the centers. Council's own land use policies that we have in the development review guidelines is similar to that. It notes that the development should be concentrated in the town centers, the more intense development. I mentioned that the master plan is now being reviewed, and that's where we'll have an opportunity to sort of refine those recommendations that I mentioned and really try to set a vision for the Bowie Center itself. So not just the retail part of the Bowie Town Center, but the entire area around the 5301 interchange. As far as this property goes and the review process that's coming up in terms of the plan, the amendment to the basic plan, the county planning board hearing is September 10th. So that's coming up rather quickly, but the planning board in this type of case is advisory to the county council, just in the same way that the city council is advisory to the county. So the planning board will hear the case on September 10th and make a recommendation just like you do. Then it'll go through the zoning hearing examiner. The hearing examiner will hold their hearing and issue a decision, which then gets filed with the county council. And then the county council has a certain amount of time to decide what they want to do with the case. And so it's still months, it's going to take months and months of time, for adequate notice being given, scheduling of meetings, hearings held, and decision-making time. So it's probably going to be at least, I would guess, about 6 months or something before it would clear the county council. And then, as we mentioned earlier tonight, there will be subsequent steps in the review process, because if you get your basic plan amendment approved, then you're able to file the preliminary plan of subdivision, go through adequate public facilities. There's a companion project plan called the Comprehensive Design Plan, which helps to modify or nail down some of the relationships, the land use relationships on the parcel itself. And then I mentioned earlier the specific design plan. When you actually have a product that you want to build, you have to come through a separate phase, and there's hearings held on that as well, where you're looking at the actual project that's going to be built. And those go through the county planning board and through the county council.
Okay, and so Joe, but I think what I was really heading towards is, what do you think we could expect would be the next step in terms of, say, if Macy's folds or closes or what have you, and comes back with a plan for redevelopment? They have to. Can you speak to what you think that would look like in terms of, they'd have to come in? We're already at the 2090 total, presumably, with this new allotment. They'd have to go through the process from the get-go to get any residential use in that area of the town center too, correct?
Right, because what we're dealing with is changing the cap on the number of units. When the Bowie Town Center was originally approved as a planned project back in the 1970s, there was an actual range of density that you could have. And the 1,420 units that they're currently capped at was something that just responded to a specific project that was in front of the county. And they said, okay, it's within the range that's permitted, but we're going to hold you to what you ask for. And again, this amendment that we're looking at now is the same thing. They're just asking to move that cap from 1,420 to 2,090. But those framework plans that I mentioned, the county general plan, the master plan for Bowie, they designate a much higher density in terms of a policy. So certainly it will be necessary for anyone who wants to come into the project and do more residential units to have to go through a similar process to amend the basic plan to increase the cap. So I don't know that there's an easier way to do it unless there's some way that there could be an amendment proposed that sort of eliminates the cap and just allows it to be, subject to those policy plans that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Do any of my colleagues have any other comments, questions, or concerns? All right. If not, we've been here almost 2 hours. Again, we want to thank everybody who's joined us today. Again, this is a really important project to us as a city council. As my colleague Michael Esteve said in the beginning, this is a new council that has strategically pretty much voted against every major development project that we did not believe was in the best interest of the citizens of the city. So again, Councilman Wolfley, Councilman Esteve,
when the nation's very existence was challenged, it was Lincoln's.
by all means.
Oh, I just want to just add in there because no comments other than to say thank you to all the residents, as you were saying, for being on. And just remember that what we're trying to do as a council is what we believe and what we know is in the best interest of what the citizens want and just to move the city forward. So I want to thank everyone for participating, and that's done. That's me.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Michael, I think you have something to say.
Yeah, so just we got a flurry of chats. Some of them we've kind of addressed, but as far as process, a resident asks, what's the next step in all this? As far as voting, so our vote on this as a city council is on September the 8th. That's a Tuesday at 8 at our regular council meeting. If you have feedback that you would like to send for that meeting to be read into the record, you can send that to our city clerk, just cityclerk@citybowie.org. But in the interim, we do encourage you to talk to us. As a council, we're going to be talking one-on-one about the feedback we got tonight. We are going to be talking to the developer about this feedback. The developer is meeting, I think as Mayor Pro Tem Boafo said, with the CEO of Prince George's County Schools this week to talk a little bit about their thoughts, whether there's anything this development can take into consideration based on the county's needs. And so there's a lot of conversations that's going to be happening. And tonight was a big part of getting additional resident feedback. So we kind of know what sorts of things that we want to focus on asking the developer for. On my end, I've been very open about the fact that I am going to ask for fewer total residential units, focusing on getting the highest quality retail we can, and making sure, as Councilmember Wolfley and as Mr. Wooten from the Citizens Committee said, getting a design that is fully integrated so that you're encouraging people to walk within the space. It's an attractive space that people want to come to. It's not just apartments on one end, shopping on the other, and a bunch of parking in between, but that it's fully integrated, that there's a smart use of placemaking, that there's multimodalism considered, because that will not only make the space more desirable for the whole community and not just the handful of people who live and work there, but it will also help minimize some of the concerns about traffic and minimize some of those external impacts that residents are understandably concerned about. So that's all I had. Thank you everyone for participating. And feel welcome to continue to email us at the public info email address and directly. And I know my colleagues and I will be happy to talk with anyone who wants to continue to talk between now and September the 8th.
All right, you guys. Joe, to the rest of the team, John Henry King, Boyd, and Joshua, again, thank you guys as well. And to Anthony, who's been on the entire time doing some IT work for us behind the scenes. We appreciate all of you guys. And you guys have a good night.
Thank you.